What's going on, everybody? Good afternoon. Hope you guys are doing well. And as I said a couple hours ago when I made the video talking about the trade that the Seahawks just participated in earlier today, we got to talk a little bit more about the details here. Seahawks trade a 2026 sixth round pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Jaguars send back defensive tackle, defensive lineman Roy Robertson-Harris. Been confirmed by all the major beat reporters out there in the NFL. This video is being powered by BetUS. More on them a little bit later. But we got to talk about this player a little bit. We got to try to understand what we might be getting into here, what the ramifications are, what the consequences are if the trade doesn't go well, that kind of stuff. We got to get into this a little bit. So first of all, let's just lead off with the obvious. A 2026 sixth round pick, which is what we gave up, is basically nothing. That is a sixth round pick that will be used in about 18 months. That is not significant. That is not something that is moving the needle. It's equivalent to trading a seventh round pick from the draft in 6 months. So we didn't really give up anything for this. So from that angle, there's very little risk. That does not mean, however, there is no risk, and I will talk about that before the end of this video. But in terms of what the Seahawks gave up in the trade, it's basically nothing. From that angle, very low risk. But that doesn't mean there's no risk, period. Or even low risk, I would say, period. All right. So I wanted to first discuss that element of the trade. I think that's pretty obvious to most people that know football, but yeah, the trade itself in terms of the transaction is very good for the Seahawks. Before we go any further, though, I do want to talk about my friends over at BetUS, best online sportsbook and casino out there. You can head on over there right now, throw down a wager on this very big, very intriguing Buffalo Bills New York Jets Monday Night Football game that starts in a couple hours. You can bet on props, you can bet on the point spread, you can bet on over-unders, you can do halves, you can do quarters, and you can do it for pretty much any other sports game out there. Right now, BetUS is offering a 150% deposit bonus on your first deposit up to $2,000 if you use promo code YouTube150, and 125% deposit bonus on your next two deposits up to $2,000. So head on over there right now, get to some gambling, BetUS. Get that free money. Promo code YouTube150 gets you that 150% deposit bonus on that first deposit. So check it out. A lot of stuff to bet on. Bet on the Seahawks or bet against the Seahawks if you would prefer to. It's your business. But check out BetUS. All right. So first of all, just the basic raw facts of Roy Robertson-Harris. He was an undrafted rookie free agent back in, I want to say, 2017. And he's been in the league a while, right? He came into the league on the Chicago Bears. Grew up a little bit in that Fangio scheme that they had there for a little while in the mid to late 10s, I guess you would call it. Was generally a fairly productive player when he was healthy. Never huge production overall, right? Like you're looking at these Bears years, these 4 years he spent with the Chicago Bears. You know, he was never a star player. He was never even a lead player. He actually didn't start that many games in Chicago, but generally productive, generally useful. And then he signed a significant contract to go to Jacksonville and has actually played well enough to earn now a second contract in the last calendar year. So in Jacksonville, he actually started pretty much every game, and his production remained solid, if not spectacular. He gives you about 3 sacks a year. Gives you somewhere around 35 to 45 tackles a season. Makes some plays in the backfield. And overall, he's a player who helps you win a little bit. So just on a very generic surface level look, decent player, doesn't get pushed back a lot in the run, a lot of strength, knows how to put himself in the right position. And one thing about Jacksonville this year, as much as they stink, as much as Jacksonville has been a terrible team so far this year, their run defense has actually not been all that bad. And Roy Robertson-Harris is the leading snap getter on that defensive line for that team. So he's doing something right. I'm not going to say he's doing everything right, but he's doing something right over there. You want to dig a little bit deeper, over the last 3 full seasons he's played, he gives you about one pressure a game on PFR. PFF gives him more like a little more than 2 pressures a game, but we all know how that discrepancy works. So, a little bit of getting after the quarterback, not a lot, but, you know, he's a presence out there. He does stuff. So, it's not too bad of a player. I think these advanced stats do indicate a player who is useful, who is impactful. But we got to go a little bit deeper than that, right? We haven't said nearly enough about Roy Robertson-Harris yet. So let's take a look at a few things. First, let's just start with the base level Pro Football Focus stuff. They're not big fans, right? They're not big fans of Roy Robertson-Harris. So far this year, 54.5 PFF grade, not good. Nothing really stand out here in any category. The year before that, they thought he was a workable player, but not anything terribly special. Doesn't stand out in any area. And the year before that, 2022, again, just kind of a jag. Pun not intended, by the way. Pun not intended whatsoever. Just kind of a guy who's out there, according to PFF. But that doesn't necessarily make it true. For whatever it's worth, PFF is very low on Jadeveon Clowney so far this year as well. And my understanding is that RRH, as I'm going to call him for the rest of this video because Roy Robertson-Harris is a mouthful, was one of the chief dislikers. I'll use that word. One of the chief dislikers of Doug Peterson. Even going back to last year, he was very vocal and very clear about the fact that he thought Doug Peterson was the wrong man for the job. And part of this trade is probably to get him out of that locker room that he hated being in, and they probably hated having him. So there is something to be said for getting out of a toxic environment and going to one where you're a little more appreciated and you like it a little bit more. So I'm not going to discount that. But RRH was not doing a very good job hiding his disdain for that Jacksonville coaching staff. So take that as you will. Maybe you think Doug Peterson deserves it. Or maybe you think that Roy Robertson-Harris is in his feelings a little too much, or some combination. So, looking at the PFF stuff, one thing that I really wanted to take a look at that I think is more meaningful than even their grading, because the thing is, his grades are bad this year, but Jacksonville is bad this year. It's a little bit harder to get graded well by PFF when your team is trash. Jacksonville might be the worst team in the league. They're in the conversation for it. But I go over here, and I'm looking at these alignment snap counts. You can see them above my head. So far this year, he mostly aligns in B-gap, so as a defensive tackle. And he does a decent amount of lining up over the tackle, and a good amount of lining up outside the tackle. So he's playing some edge, doing some 5-tech, maybe a little bit of like the 4-eye roll or the 3-tech. So that's kind of where he occupies. 3-tech, 4-eye, 5-tech. That's kind of how I'm looking at this. And maybe a little bit of the edge, but I wouldn't think about him in that context. Now, if you look at over the last several seasons, most of the time, maybe not an absolute majority of the time, but a good percentage of the time, and I know my head's in the way. Let me move. But you can see, if you look at these numbers, he is usually lining up in B-gap, which makes this just a little bit confusing because if there's one player on this team right now on the defensive line that's doing his job, it's Leonard Williams, who is a player that aligns in B-gap. Leonard Williams is not a nose tackle. Leonard Williams is not an edge rusher. He is and I know this defense can be a little bit confusing sometimes. Sometimes they use the 3-4 terminology. Sometimes they use the 4-3. But this strikes me as a little bit redundant with Leonard Williams. And let's not forget, you've also got Byron Murphy, unless he's not coming back from the injury. If he's not coming back from the injury, then I think this is exactly what it is. Byron Murphy is kind of a 3-tech player as well. Now, I know we're playing him at nose tackle a pretty decent amount, but that's just to get him on the field. That's not really what he's meant to do. So I understand you're trying to maybe reduce the need to utilize Mike Morris or Miles Adams, and maybe you want to give yourself somebody to play over Draymond Jones. Maybe you just feel like Draymond needs to get off the field. But I gotta say, from a need standpoint, he's going to help, right? Having a deep rotation helps, but I'm not totally sure I get where he fits in, because here's the thing, that stuff I said about him lining up as an edge outside the tackle, that's kind of new to this season. If you look next to my head here, you can see him lining up outside the tackle was something that almost never happened in previous years. His season high on snaps outside the tackle was 84. He's already at 67 this year, so that's new, and that's probably part of the reason why he's not playing well. They're forcing him into a role that he can't fill very effectively. So he's played a grand total of 155 snaps at A-gap, so nose tackle, in his career. That's not what you're getting him for. You're kind of getting him to occupy the role that you already have guys like Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, and I'll throw Mike Morris in there as well. It's not, I don't know what he's bringing that's different. Is it just a Draymond Jones replacement? Is it that simple? Because to me, the problem with Draymond Jones is he's playing too many snaps at edge, so I don't think you're replacing that with this guy. So I'm not saying he's a bad player. In fact, I think he's probably a pretty good player, and I do think he's going to help a little bit. But this would not have been super high on my priority list to address if I was trying to figure out how to fix this team over the mini bye week. So I don't dislike it. I don't think it's a bad trade. I want to be very clear about that. But the fact that this is a guy who aligns in B gap most of the time, that this is not a nose tackle who can take some of the load off an older guy like Hankins, you can only have so many B gap players, right? We already have that problem, and that's why Murphy's playing quote-unquote nose tackle as much as he is, because he wants to get out there. Now, that wouldn't be a problem, right? Normally, I would just shrug my shoulders and say, oh, it's depth, right? You cannot go wrong building depth on the defensive line. Like, normally, that's what I would say. But here's the problem. I said in my first video that RRH was a player in the last year of his deal. I misspoke. He's actually in the first year of his deal. You can go to Over the Cap and you can see that he signed an extension last year that is now kicked in starting in 2024. It was like, what, 3 years, $21.6 million? So for 2024, you're okay. The base salary for 2024 is $1.7 million. And I'm guessing that some of that money has already been paid to him from the Jaguars. So you are inheriting probably about, I don't know, 1.2, 1.3 million in a cap hit for this year. Maybe it's the full base. Maybe it's 1.7. I don't think it is. But even if it is, that's nothing. Okay? 1.7 million, that's totally fine. I got nothing to say about that. So that part we're cool. But then you get to 2025, the money you inherit, and this is, by the way, backed up from Brady Henderson, the base salary that you stand to inherit, because he gets all his bonus money from Jacksonville, is $5.6 million and $5.8 million. Now, you should be able to get out of that very easily. You can either trade him for a little piece, or you can just cut him, because it's base salary, right? It's not bonus. So at the end of this year, you can just cut him and say, happy trails. So I'm not going to act like we should panic about this. But if you end up wanting to keep this guy for one reason or another, which is possible, that's a lot of money that you are probably going to need. So I don't think it's a matter of will he get cut, it's when will he be cut. I think this is a 1-year deal and then peace out thing. And the only thing you really have to take on is the 1.7. Unless he plays really well. And even then, where are you going to fit him in? Big Cat just signed his extension and Murphy just got drafted. So the money part of this is the one area where this kind of sucks, right? Because you are probably looking at a situation where you're going to have to just cut him. Now, the cut should be very cheap. I also don't think you inherit the void money. I could be wrong about that, but to my understanding, you don't. So we have our options open to us. But even the 1.7 million or 1.2 million or 1.3 million or whatever the cap hit this year is not completely insignificant. So decent enough trade Does it actually help you? I'm not so sure. All right, thank you to BetUS for powering this video. Remember to always gamble responsibly. I will see you guys later with more Seahawks stuff. Let me know what you think down below.